My name's Dan Baker, I'm a musician, and every day during this coronavirus pandemic of 2020, I've recorded a piece of music, cover versions ranging from Edward Elgar to Motorhead, and I've used Logic Pro X to record all the audio on, but I've also videoed all of my performances, whether it be guitar or violin or bass or keyboards or vocals, and then put them onto my iPad. Now, I'm videoing this on an iPhone 5, which is exactly the same camera I use for all of my performances. And the iPad here is running an app called LumaFusion, which is hugely powerful, unbelievably powerful. You can have 6 camera angles at the same time running with things in different parts of the screen, or you can flick between them as you would see in a conventional TV program. It also has 4 audio tracks, which are stereo, so I just put one of my stereo tracks is the output of Logic Pro X, and then I drag everything to fit. Now, I'm going to show you how I cut one of my videos together, just skimming over the main features of LumaFusion and things to avoid, and things that you can do with it. Here we go. So here we are with LumaFusion. Now, just before we begin, I'm an advocate of not using the screen grab of the iPad because it's such a tactile device. I think it's really helpful to be able to see fingers moving about on the screen. Now, I'm going to do the tune She's Not There. I've already done a video edit of this, and this is coming out before this demo, but I'm going to show you how you import stuff. So we've got our main working space of LumaFusion, and this is a completely new file. It's this little button down here, little plus button, where you can go into your files or saved things that you've done already. You can see all my videos there. If I go to plus, I can name a project. So She's Not There demonstration. And then a little plus button. You can set the frame rate and the frame aspect at this juncture as well. 16:9 landscape is your standard thing that you'd watch on the telly. You could have all sorts of things, 4:3, 4:3:3. There's all sorts of formats that you can work with, and this works with 4K video as well. Okay, so there's the plus button. Here's the screen. Now, on the left-hand side here, you have some sort of files where you can import stuff. Now, at the top left here is a little bit of that's the sort of main menu where you can look at your photos that you've got on your photo roll, or imported, which would be things like AirDrop, where I would put my audio files. Story blocks, you can buy those sort of things. I haven't used any of those. Titles, you can put your words, and transitions, so fades and that sort of thing. And of course, you can add or edit your sources there. Now, I'm going to go for the imported first and AirDrop, because that's where my soundtrack is. She's Not There too, it was. I did 3 different mixes. I'm going to click and hold on it and drag it down onto the little green icon you can see there, because that's my audio track. So if I play this back, and there we go. There's my video, there's my audio file. Now, I've got lots of different instruments. If I go back to the top left here, I'm going to go to Photos and Videos, and all of the takes that I've done, which I've sent from my phone via AirDrop, very, very quick and easy method, are shown here. So, for example, my bass part is here. So I'll just go back to the beginning. And I always name my files by saying what I'm doing, because it makes a massive difference. I know that's a bass guitar, but when you've got 6 violin parts and you want to make sure you got the right one, you need to name them. So here's the bass. Now, of course, I've set the camera rolling, and there's going to be a gap before the start of the bass part itself. But this is where you can actually decide what portion of the video you want to import. So I've got 2 bar counting, so I'm going to move this little yellow slider to about there. Now you have a little telltale sign. You can't see it very well there, but it's 4 seconds and 7 frames in is where the bass part starts. So if I grab my little yellow bracket here and move it into 407, well, that's 408. This is all non-destructive, by the way, as well, so you can actually just do what you want. I'm going to now go back to here and drag my video file. Helpfully, you get a sort of an animated view of what's happening. Now, I've got to check that this is going to be synced up now. So I'm going to turn down the audio track very slightly so that I can hear the camera audio in which I can sort of drag things to fit. Oh, so it's very, very early. Okay, now this is the first video that I've dragged in. Now I'm going to mention this because it's very important that the first video is right, because if you delete the first video you put on, anything else that's above it, which is the other video angles, will be deleted. So you want to get this one right. Now, it started pretty much at the beginning of when I press play. Ideally, I'd like a little bit more control over the beginning point so that when somebody watches this on YouTube, it doesn't cut the beginning off. So I'm just going to grab there's 2 little arrows. There's a left and a right arrow. The left arrow actually enables you to extend that video backwards. Remember I said it was non-destructive. So I'm going to go with that. Now, on the audio file, the green one, it gives you a little sort of waveform. It sort of tells you where the sound is. That's mega helpful because the blue actually has a similar thing on it as well. You can see and also if you widen this, if you just open your fingers up, you can look in really super fine detail and you can actually drag things a frame, which is perfectly accurate enough. So my bass part starts about there. So I need to drag my audio part now so that it matches the bass part. But of course, the audio file is actually too long at the moment. I can't drag it back because there's a 0 or a beginning line. So that's where I can actually just do this to the beginning of the audio, not right to the beginning, but just before it, and then drag it so that it's roughly in line. Now I'm going to bring the audio track up slightly and then listen to the bass part, the camera audio, along with my mastered audio. Whew, fluke. Okay, that is there, which means I can now mute the camera, and if I play back now from the beginning, you can see that my bass playing will line up with the audio. Fine. All well and good. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do with this video is I'm going to make it smaller so I can drag other stuff onto the screen. Now, if I single click on the blue there, and then the little pencil tool at the bottom here, I get to a page where I can change things like effects or the sound or the speed at which I've the video, which I'm obviously not going to do here because I'm trying to cut it to audio. And the left hand one here is really the most important one to start with. It allows you to position your picture on the page. It allows you to change the size, and you can also change the sort of aspect ratio. So I could make myself look thinner. That'd be nice. So I'm just going to do the size there. I'm just going to drag this down. You can go all the way. You can even make it bigger. If you've got video where you've got something a bit smaller, you can make it bigger. But beware, of course, the resolution of the camera that you're using will obviously come into effect if you try to make things too big. So I'm going to just make this quite small, and then I can just drag on it to put it in position on the picture. I could either do that with that, or you have a position X and Y slider there, which allows you to do the same thing. At the same time, I could crop it as well. There's a little bit of a light shadow there on the left-hand side of the picture, but luckily it doesn't interfere with where the bass guitar is. So I could go to the left-hand side and crop the image like that. And there we go. There is my first video. Now, if I go back on here at the top left, it returns to my main window, and you can see that my bass guitar take is now at the bottom right. Now, I've got a piano part here. Now, you can see all my messy wires and carpet on the floor, and yeah, it's not really a rock and roll. So I'm going to bring that in. Now I'm going to employ exactly the same method by just playing back from the beginning and finding out where beat 1 is. And once again. And there it is. It's about 5 seconds in. So I'm just going to grab that and then put the keyboard down here. Now, as you can see, it's hidden the bass part. Don't worry about that because it's still there. You can see that I've dragged the video onto the second portion there. So I'm just going to play that back with the audio track slightly lower so that I can drag the piano to fit. Okay, so the piano is slightly delayed, so I'm going to just make it smaller, and you can see, again, a little telltale sort of waveform, which allows me to sort of drag it roughly in position with the audio. Don't drag it in position with one of the other videos because you get that sort of cumulative error, which might sort of manifest itself by the time you drag your 6th image in. That's close. But be aware also that a frame's difference is virtually nothing. It might seem like quite a coarse adjustment when you consider there are 30 frames in a second, which is quite a long time, but a frame is enough. You know, if you spend lots of money on other apps, of course you can edit to much finer detail, but this is absolutely fine. Now, I'm going to crop this. I'm going to take my legs and most of my arms away. So I'm going to go to cropping and then crop from the bottom and the top and probably from the left-hand side as well, because that's the bass end of the piano and I don't use that much. So now I'm going to change the size and I'll stick it up the top there somewhere. Yeah. Now, as you can see, the piano itself is slightly rotated. There's a bit of a gap at the top. You do have a rotational slider here, which will allow you to change the angle of the keyboard. That's pretty helpful. But be aware that when you crop it, it will crop at that same angle. So just make sure you're sort of happy with the positioning. And also it means that your camera work needs to be as good as it possibly can be to avoid these angles in the first place. Okay, so there's my second track. Now, if I play these back at once, you can see that they're both on the page. If I double click on this, you can see a bigger version of it for preview. There we go. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. Now, just to clean this up, the piano part doesn't come in. You can see there's only the bass in the first couple of frames. So I'm going to just drag the piano one back so that it starts at the same time. And of course, you can add your things later. Notice the gap at the beginning. That's what I want for now. I might be able to sort of truncate everything later. Okay, guitar part, which is the next one up. Let's just check where that comes in. Rhythm guitar. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so roughly 5 seconds in. So it's a similar thing when I'm setting up my camera. There we go. You can develop a filming procedure which would help this as well, things like clapperboards and that sort of thing. But not to worry for now. I'm just going to drag that back in into here, and I'm going to test the guitar versus the audio track. You have an audio mixer here which allows you to set levels. It's ever so slightly ahead, and you can see that in the waveforms there. Now, if I drag this, if I click and hold it, you get a little telltale sort of clock there that tells you how far you're dragging. There are 30 frames in a second. So I'm going to drag about 3 frames, I think. Now I have a feeling that I'm probably in business with this one. Yeah, that's all good. Okay, so I've dragged 3 things in. So I'm not going to go any further and drag everything else in because actually the procedure is exactly the same. But I'm going to resize this and do a little bit of fading. Now, size. Let's maybe assume that the guitar part, for example, is the most important part of the entire thing. At the moment, you can see that I've actually beheaded myself as the bass player, which I obviously don't want to do. Now, under cropping here, there is an option called edge softness, which allows you to actually fade the videos together. So if I put this fader up, you'll see that the bass player's head re-emerges from the darkness. There we go. Now, you could also fade the bass player in to allow the guitarist to, if the headstock was lower, for example, I would just try that. If I just put the guitar lower, and then fade the bass player in as well as the guitarist, you can see that there is further blending of the bass with respect to the guitar. Now, you do get a little square where the guitar is. That's kind of unavoidable. You know, we are dealing with something that is only £30, and actually it's just huge what you can do. And it's not fussy with, you know, codecs and phones and things, whereas things like Final Cut, it says, oh, you've lost a frame here, can't import, and you say, oh, I just want to make a video. Okay, so now we've done that. If I go back to the first page, you will see that the keyboard, for example, fades into the guitar a bit. I've actually moved the guitar away from the bass. Now, of course, if you've got something that's shadowed and a line going across a face, it can be a little bit off-putting and make it look a little bit sort of fragmented. So, for example, I could make the guitar very slightly smaller. Now, in addition to the sliders, you have arrows, which allow you to make very, very fine adjustments. That's really useful when you're positioning stuff. But I'm going to drag it down a little bit further towards the bass, and you can see that my hat, the guitarist's hat, is now faded into the keyboard. So it's just a nice way of combining things. There we go. Now, I've got quite a few parts on this, more than 6. Now, this is where my sort of analog tape recording days come back into view, because I've actually done a combination of the strings, and I've made that. Here's one I made earlier, kind of thing. Now, what I did was I dragged all of the violin parts in, and I actually applied filters to them. So you can see that there. I've actually, I'll show you the raw file of that, actually, so that you can see what I've done. I've got 4 parts, as you can see, and I've used the waveforms to help me with just the violins. There we go. So I've used the audio on the cameras just to help me line everything up. Now, if I just go for the first, edit the first one, you can see that I've got this one selected here. I'm actually going to go back and select the last one because I've applied a bit of a draconian filter here. This is where this button at the bottom right comes in, the one with the little star, the asterisk on it, because you get all of these sort of presets here, and it very helpfully shows you a thumbnail of what you're editing. Blast. Let's try that. Okay. Now we get all sorts of things, brightness and contrast, you know, that sort of thing. Be careful with the brightness. Now, this is really important to get the brightness right on the phone in the first place, because if you don't get that right and it's too dark, you obviously can't brighten it up without adding all that noise and adding the square. Perhaps it's a special effect, I don't know. But also, overexposing means that you will have sort of bright bits where you wouldn't want them. And if you try and lower the brightness, it'll just kill everything else apart from those very bright spots. So you've got to be very careful getting the right camera sort of brightness to start off with. So I can do this. I can do all sorts of vibrance, saturation. I can do all sorts of other things. Now, you can also add other things in addition. Color punch cool. you can see that it adds it to the... I've also sharpened this. Now, that's a very important point. To sharpen anything that goes really, really small. Otherwise, you can end up with a sort of something that looks a little bit blurry. Now, the sharpness is under the little droplet tool here, and somewhere down here, sharp 2 times, you can see that that's ticked. That just brings the definition of that much smaller thumbnail so that it looks as smooth as if it was bigger. So, colour punch, cool. We can blend that in, or we can do all sorts of other things, lithograph, mix, radius. You can do anything. Do absolutely anything. That's, some people say, oh yeah, it looks like a Photoshop effect. But yeah, it is what it is. We create. So, just going back to the main image, then you can see my sort of edited violin there. Now, in order to send that to my working space, to send that to the demo that I'm making at the moment, I've got 4 things here, but I've already used 3 of my camera angles, so this would make 7, which he can't have. And I've got vocals and other lead guitar to put on next. So this bottom arrow here, that is what allows you to share or export all of this stuff. So I'm going to export it as a movie. I'm just going to put it into my photos. Now, you are faced with a set of, settings and options. Keep it as high as you can. This is true of audio as well. You should keep things absolutely top quality. So I'm going to take the resolution up to 1080p. And you think, well, it's only a 720p phone. But I've made the thumbnails smaller and used the sharpness plugin. Video quality says economy at the moment. I'm going to go for standard. Now, this is something that I've settled on as part of my sort of process. MPEG-4, which is your file format, you can either have that or QuickTime as a movie. MPEG-4 and QuickTime are roughly the same, but QuickTime is more of an Apple thing. I must admit, I've settled into using that. And then you just click export and writing movie. I'm going to cancel that because obviously I've done this already. Now I'm going to go into my demo. She's not there demonstration. That's what I was working on just now. And I'm going to import that photograph. Now it's this one here. There we go. There are my 4 violins. You can see I hadn't edited that final one. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. So I'm going to click in my space and go all the way back to the start and drag my violins in. There we go. There are the 4 violins as a sort of flattened image. Way, okay. So they're a little bit enthusiastic to start with. There we go, that's better. I'm going to take the levels down now, and I'm going to... Now, I made a little bit of a mistake when I did this because I didn't leave enough room at the start to do all this. But there is a little bit of room here. Ideally, have the sort of... have a little bit of a pre-roll, so there's a bit of silence before. So, I'm going to resize this. Let's have a look. And I'm going to do that. Now, I've made all of these violins horizontal, but I could have positioned them sort of 2 and 2, like a cube. But the reason I did it like this is because I want it to actually fit. I could put it top left here. There we go. Something like that. It's that easy to do this. And you just check, and ideally watch the entire performance in case the guitarist's head moves. As you can see, it's actually clipped the guitarist's head. Now, I've exported this as a 16:9 file, which means that I can actually crop the bottom of it to reveal my head again. I don't need to crop the top because it's outside the working space, but I will do it anyway. And then the left-hand side into there. There we go. Now, I can make that edge softness slider go up again, so beginning to reveal the piano keyboard. But you can see the square across the piano keyboard there, so perhaps I need to crop those violins a little further. Now, when you do crop with edge softness, it doesn't actually get rid of the violin until you really cover over it. So it's actually quite a clever way of blending stuff in. So now I've got my vocals and other, you can see my violin parts, and I've got a Hammond organ part. So with diagonal things, it's obviously a little bit more tricky, but you have to think about the picture as you're going and think, well, where am I going to put what? What is the most important thing in this song? Now, I'm going to go and find the actual She's Not There that I've done. Here we go, day 44, She's Not There. This is my finished article. As you can see, the keyboard actually went in a different place. So if I just go back to the beginning. Now, you can see that I've put some text in. Oh, stop. There we go. You can see that I've put some text in. Now, what I've done with this is, in fact, I'll show you where the text is. I'll just go to the back arrow there. Under this sort of flower symbol at the top, if you go to titles, it then allows you to choose between all sorts of things. I always just use the plain white one because I don't want any sort of special effects. I want to be able to control it. So let's say I want to drag something in a little bit further here. Perhaps I'm going to put a shameless plug to my YouTube channel here. So you drag that there. It says your text here. Now, as well as using the pencil tool to edit, you can double click, which does the same thing. It opens this page. And then double click on the your text here, and then it gives you a little sort of box where you could, a basic word processor where you could type something in. So demo for YouTube. There we go. And click done when you're finished. Now, this is where you can choose your font and your orientation and all sorts of other things. I always use Gill Sans Bold. I've stuck with that for a while now. Now, you can change all the sort of usual things with the text, but you can also have things like an edge colour. Now, if I maybe make the edge colour electric blue, for example, you can see that I can change that. If I just click outside the box, I could change the width of it. And the opacity, how much of it is actually there. There's all sorts of other things. I could have a shadow, not that it makes much difference. If I drag the text over the piano, of course, the shadow would show up there. And all sorts of other things. You can rotate it, you can scale it, you could do that or whatever you like. Absolutely brilliant. It's so powerful. Now, I'm just going to delete that. There we go. Now, at the moment, I've got my 5 tracks together, and then the vocals come in. I've got my area at the bottom for my singing, and I've used the edge softness control there. Now, halfway through this tune is a guitar solo, but I've run out of tracks. But luckily, the vocalist doesn't sing there. Look at that face, honestly. So I've actually managed to cut my guitar solo on and put it on the vocal track, and then when the vocals come in, it comes back out. Now, usually I would put the lead guitar somewhere else, but I've actually decided to do it full screen, and I've also dragged a transition. Here we go, transitions. I've just used the cross dissolve one. I don't use many of the others really, but you've got all sorts of things. Just play to your heart's content. It's all non-destructive. And you can vary the length of that transition. So if, for example, I'll just go somewhere else. If I drag the cross dissolve down to here, for example, you have to drag it so that you can see there's a little white circle there, or white square. What that's done is faded out my vocal track. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, it's actually faded it out. If I undo that, so there's no transition, you can see that my vocal part just stops dead, like that. But that's essentially what you do. And then for the guitar solo, you can vary the length of it by clicking on the transition and then just doing that. And it just resizes everything. It looks slightly out of phase and out of alignment when you first do it, but it does correct itself. I learnt that to my cost when I tried to sort of compensate for what I thought was a duff transition, but it wasn't. So there's my guitar solo. So the end of the vocals. And then the same the other end. Now, just before I finish, I've pretty much covered most things here. I'm going to go and have a look at the audio tracks. Now, I put 2 other mixes on because I wasn't sure which one I'd want, but you've actually got 4 here to choose between. That's quite useful. If you've got a few different mixes and you're not sure and you want to cut the video anyway, it's quite handy to be able to have this sort of clipboard, as it were. As you can see, only the bottom one is up in level. If I click on this volume thing here and then click into the edit window, I get a slightly different set of options here. No video anymore. Now, I can put reverbs, or well, actually no, there's no reverb, but I can do things like distortion, or I can put a compressor on, or I can put an audio limiter on. Now, this is where a file from maybe GarageBand or something which may be sort of unmastered or has a lower volume level can be bumped up a bit. If I go on to limiter, you get a series of controls here which allow you to limit the amount, and this is basically I'm limiting to 0 dB. So if I tweak the slider here and play back, it'll seem a lot louder. Nobody told me about her. But it squashes it to Kingdom Come, so you've got to be a bit careful with that. You can have things like equalizers. You've got all sorts of things. If you've got a slightly sort of dodgy, honky frequency, for example, you can cut it with that. Ideally, if you've got audio production software, you would have done that before. Now, you can get rid of any plugins by just clicking the dustbin and take the limiter away. Pan control, you can just send it to the left and the right if you like. If you've got something that's slightly right heavy, you could do that. So there we are. There it is. What a fantastic bit of kit this is. And at the end, obviously, you can export your entire movie to photos or YouTube, Vimeo files, or you can airdrop it somewhere else. It's just the most user-friendly video editing software I think I've ever used. And I have used a few of them. So there we are. LumaFusion for the iPad. What an absolute star.